east coast of Florida during the next several hours. The risk will shift along the immediate coast of Georgia and Carolinas on Wednesday into Thursday. Okay, so just mentioning the reason I'm doubting the hurricane force winds for at least sustained in the Carolinas is because I just read the buoy report. This is just north of the center, and they're not even getting sustained hurricane force winds. They're getting gusts to 80. But keep in mind, when this was a Category 5 hurricane and it was belting Grand Bahama Island, West End Settlement Point, Grand Bahama Island was not getting sustained hurricane force winds. Now, I know the center has expanded out a little bit, but it's also weakened quite a bit. So I think we're mainly going to see tropical storm force winds in the Carolinas. My main concern for the Carolinas is all this rising water that's going to be moving in there. You don't need to shutter your house. It's not this kind of a deal for the Carolinas. This is going to be probably Category 1 conditions at most for the Carolinas. The water is going to be the big deal. Even the rain doesn't really seem to, the rain could be a big deal, but I think the surge flooding is the biggest impacts from this hurricane as it moves into these areas. Florida, I think, is going to be minimally affected. We've seen this all up and down the coast today. It's paralleling the coast right now, and the most, I think I've seen gust, I think one gust was around 60 in the Melbourne area. Let's go ahead and pull up these observations real quick. I want to show you. First of all, let me show you the current radar. So here we are. So I'm down here, and all day today, my highest wind gust has been 39 miles an hour. Now, this hurricane was further south this morning, and we were getting some of the yellow bands that you see there up on the central Florida coast right now, and we had barely any gusts over 40, 50 miles an hour in South Florida. So it's getting a little closer to the mid Florida coast, and so they may get some gusts around 60 miles an hour in some of these squalls coming in here. But let's take a look at let me clear these drawings here, and let's take a look at some of the observations. And this is the really neat thing about the Hurricane City page, is that we can get the buoy reports. Just to let you guys know, I've been fighting something. I don't know what it is, but the last few days I've been not feeling well at all. So please try to bear with me here. Okay, so here is the map of the Atlantic Basin on the front page of the tracking page at Hurricane City. Look at all the activity out there right now. We just had Fernand develop here in the Gulf of Mexico. It's going to move into La Pesca, Mexico as a 50-mile-an-hour tropical storm. That's the official forecast from the Hurricane Center. Of course, we have Dorian here. We have an area of disturbed weather near Bermuda. And we have Tropical Depression 8 out in the East Atlantic, which will be named Gabrielle. And then what's really interesting is what's coming off the coast of Africa, because some of the models indicate that this could be a player down the road for the United States. I want to show you some of the models in a minute, but the GFS really wants to ramp that one up and take it in the same direction as Dorian. So let's just take one thing at a time here. But we have 4 systems out there right now, and the one that could be the biggest threat besides Dorian is not even off the coast of Africa yet, or it's coming off the coast. So we'll see what happens with that down the road. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of the current observations. First of all, let's do this. Let me show you the cone and the best performing models within the cone. Okay, the hurricane warning areas are in red on this map. So you see them along the coast of South Carolina. You see them along the northeast coast of Florida. And again, this is precautionary because the left front quadrant of the hurricane force wind field may touch some of these areas. Some of these bands may give them some hurricane force wind gusts. hurricane warning all the way up to Wilmington. And there's all the best performers within the cone of error from the National Hurricane Center, and they're all keeping it offshore up until it gets to the Outer Banks. Some of these, in fact, all of these models want to take it over the Outer Banks, and that would be around 90 miles per hour. So let's check some of these models here. Again, these are best performers over the last 24 hours, not necessarily over the last 5 days, although the EGRR, which is the number 2 best model over the past 24 hours, has this as an 80-mile-an-hour hurricane at this point and has it going over the Outer Banks, but keeps it offshore everywhere else. The best performer is the UK Met, the standard model, the operational model, and that also has it going over the Outer Banks. By the way, you can click on these cities along the coast and it gives you the population totals while you have this map open. So basically these are all the UK Met models that are both the interpolated models and the operational model. All the different variations of the UK model are in the top 5 tonight, and they're all keeping this off the coast mainly of the southeast U.S. except when it gets into North Carolina, and it has it going right over the Outer Banks. So let's take a look at some of the ships and buoys out here. And I know there's not going to be any ships in the area of where Dorian is right now, but let's take a look. Let's try to get some observations from up and down the coast and see if we can kind of figure out what's happening with the wind gust out there. So currently Port Palm Bay, Florida, we have a pressure at 29.56 inches, 38 knots of wind. That's just barely over tropical storm force. And we have buoy station out here showing wave heights 8.5 feet, water temperature 83 degrees. I'm zooming in even more here. West Palm Beach currently 2967 and rising, 9 miles an hour gusting to 12. Of course, we're in between feeder bands right now. And we have 18 knots near Titusville, 18 knots gusting to 32. And the buoy offshore, this is the difference between on land and offshore. The buoy offshore is showing winds, north winds at 42 knots, gusting to 54. So that's right around 60, 65 miles an hour, just off the coast of Florida. And we get up here to the Palm Coast, and we have winds around 16 knots. We have 30 knots gusting to 34 knots up in, that's up near St. Augustine, I guess, somewhere in there. And then over on the St. Johns River inlet, no, that's not reporting. Offshore of Jacksonville, we have wave heights 8.5 feet. In Jacksonville right now, we have winds north-northeast at 22, gusting to 27. So basically the point I'm trying to make is all these observations that are right near the coast or right on the coast are not really showing that strong a wind right now, even though the banding is coming in. So that's why I'm doubting that we're going to see hurricane force winds on the coast up in the Carolinas. Everything north, west, and west of the center of this hurricane has underperformed the entire time as far as wind velocities are concerned. Like I said, when it was belting the Bahamas, West End, Grand Bahama was not getting hurricane force winds because the west side is the weakest side of the storm. So I don't think, if this behaves itself and it travels along the coast and stays offshore, the winds are going to be primarily offshore winds, which will make a huge difference in the amount of surge and the amount of wind on land. If the center gets right near land, naturally the surge will be higher and the wind will be higher, and everything will change at that point. So it just depends on how close it gets to the coast, which is what the National Hurricane Center emphasized when they were discussing the impacts to North Carolina. You know, even up in Georgia right now, we got winds 21, offshore 21, gusting to 27. So, I mean, naturally, it's not up this way, so you wouldn't expect high winds up this way. Let's take a look at a buoy. This is just north of the center, and I think the Hurricane Center may have referenced this already. Winds at 50 knots, gusting to 70. So that's gusting to 80 miles an hour and sustained around 60. And that's northeast of the center. That's where you would expect the strongest winds to be. But the strongest winds on the right quadrant are not supposed to be onshore until it gets to the Outer Banks. So this is why I'm thinking South Carolina and Georgia and places like that are not going to get hurricane force winds. I think this is a precautionary measure of putting the hurricane warnings up on the coast from the National Hurricane Center, just like they did for Florida, even though nobody's getting anything near hurricane force, just to CYA. It's a CYA move. But I truly don't believe if you get any hurricane force gust at all, they're going to be gust and nothing sustained on land. Unless you're maybe in the Outer Banks, that's remain to be seen if the right front quadrant makes it over the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So here's another reason I say about the winds. Let me show you the hurricane hunters. By the way, the hurricane hunters are flying both Dorian and Fernand right now. So it looks like they're heading back. 960 millibars. So here's what's happened today. Okay, we have this was, let's see, this was from 2041, and this is from 03. So 4-hour difference. It's dropped. I mean, it's risen 2 millibars in 4 hours. So it's raising about maybe a half a millibar every hour. It's rising in pressure, so it's slowly weakening. It's still got the pressure of a strong Cat 2, low end Cat 3, but it is a Cat 2, and the pressure sometimes, as quick as the pressures drop in hurricanes, it takes wind time to catch up to the pressure drops. The same thing happens when they weaken. The pressure rises, and it takes the winds a little while to wind down because the storms become less and less intense around the center as the pressure rises inside the center. So it's up to 960 millibars. So here, let's click on this vortex message, and we have 112 miles from Melbourne to the east of Melbourne is where the center is. 960 millibars. The eye is characterized as open on the east side. 22 nautical, clear, a circular eye with a diameter of 22 nautical miles. The surface wind inbound, but the SFMR winds, which are surface winds, estimated by the aircraft. They have a device that aims down at the waves and it measures the wind on the surface, is 76 miles an hour. So that's barely hurricane force. I mean, that's right near the eye. They're getting the maximum winds are 76 miles an hour. And then when you measure the outbound winds the surface are 96 miles an hour, almost 97 miles an hour. The outbound, that was measured on the northwest quadrant, by the way. Wait a minute, it was 26 miles to the northwest, yeah, of the center fix is where they measured that wind. So it's just northwest of the eye wall, 97 miles an hour. But again, you'd have to be right on that, right next to that eye wall to get those kind. I'm going to show you the individual wind barbs here in a minute, but you have to be right near the eye wall to get those kind of winds. And I don't think that eye wall is going to come right on shore until it gets up into eastern North Carolina. The outbound wind of, no, that was the flight level wind. Let's see, the inbound surface wind was measured east-southeast of the center. So it was on the right side. They measured the winds of 76 miles an hour, and they measured 97 miles an hour on the northwest side of the eye wall of the eye. Let's see what else here. Oh, another thing to note, generally the larger the difference between the inside and outside flight level temperatures is, the bigger the difference between those two, the more it's strengthening. And right now they're almost equal. It's 12 degrees to 14 degrees Celsius. So there's only a 2-degree difference, which would indicate it's not strengthening at all. All right, so let's take a look at some of these individual barbs. So here's the center right here, the 960 millibars right in the middle of the screen. And again, let's pan that out so you can see how far off that is from, Cape Canaveral rather. And let's zoom back in on it and let's click on some of these barbs. So let's just hypothetically say, let's go way out here where maybe the closest approach to the eye wall would get near South Carolina, for an example. It just reloaded on me. Sorry about that. Okay, because they're still flying the plane. By the way, this program reloads automatically. So when the plane is leaving, it keeps following the plane across the country or wherever it's going to. So let me go back here. So let me click on some of these barbs out here. About as far away as where the edge of the eye wall, where the models and the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center are indicating that the outer edge of the eye wall would touch the coast as it's moving into the Carolinas. So if that's the case, we would see winds, surface winds here of 64 miles an hour. It's close to hurricane force, but the hurricane force winds that they're finding out there right now are right up against the eye. I mean, they're right outside the eye. They're not expanded out, 20, 30 miles out. They're right outside the eye by a few miles. So the further away you go from the eye, the less the winds are, especially to the northwest. Now, if you go to the northeast of the center, it's a completely different animal. Out here, that's about the same thing, about 50 miles an hour. Let's get a little closer in. Yeah, as soon as you get a little closer in, a few miles, it's 70 miles an hour. And then when you get right up against the eye wall, it's 95 miles an hour, right up against the eye, rather. So unless you get within this circle of winds, unless you get like in this area right in here with that eye wall, you're not going to get hurricane force winds unless you're in that circle. And that circle, according to the National Hurricane, is going to butt right up against the coast. So it's going to be so close. And again, by the time it gets up there, it might even be weaker than it is right now. And I want to show you another radar shot of the dry air that's getting into the circulation right now that's also disrupting it a little bit. And that's why the pressures are rising on this. So, and by the way, this is good news. There are people out there. I get some angry emails from people who are like, you're not alarming people enough, and you're not. Listen, I don't play that here at Hurricane City. I keep it real, and that's why a lot of people are starting to jump on board watching these broadcasts, because I'm not an alarmist. I have nothing to gain here. I'm not going to pick up followers and or money by getting more followers. You know what I mean? So I could care less. If you don't like me, don't listen, don't watch. You can go somewhere else and get your information. But I'm not going to lie and exaggerate things to get ratings, to pad my portfolio at Hurricane City, because I don't, either way it goes. If I get money, it's fine. If I don't, whatever. I have a business to run. I mean, this is my hobby. So I don't have anything to lose here. I'm being honest with the audience. Now, you could disagree with whether, I'm not ratcheting up the threat enough, because, that's what the media does. They have a lot of money to make. I'm sure they have salesmen behind the scenes that are making phone calls to roofing companies and cleanup companies, and people that work in emergency management are advertising on these TV and radio stations because it's a bonanza. And the media companies can make a fortune on hurricanes. So the more you ratchet up the fear, the more the money rolls in. It's a cottage industry. I've said this all along. And here I don't do that. if it's going to be really bad, I'll tell you. In fact, I'll go as far as to say, and I don't want to get into details here, but I'm editing right now the archive for Hurricane Dorian. I'm beginning to edit process. And I went back to the 30th, and I was doing the show right here. And I said on the show on the 30th, when it was north of Puerto Rico, well, it was like northwest of Puerto Rico, and it was heading toward the Bahamas, 120-mile-an-hour winds. And I said, this is going to be a Category 5 hurricane, and it's going to clobber the Northwest Bahamas. They're going to have devastation like they've never seen. And I said that back on the 30th, and what I was explaining on the 30th was that 2 days prior to that I was telling people it was going to be a Category 5. And that's all on the archive. When you see the archive, you're going to see that I mentioned that this was going to be a Cat 5 4 days before it hit the Bahamas, and that it was going to devastate those Bahamas. I don't have any reason to be an alarmist. I was using model data, sea surface temperatures, favorable conditions. Meanwhile, the National Hurricane Center had it as a tropical storm Category 1 for Northeast Florida. That's what they were showing at that time that I was saying that. So I'm telling you, I'm wrong from time to time. I've been wrong. But I also don't exaggerate just to try to get followers and money. That's not the way I operate. But in this case, heading toward the Carolinas, if this takes the track that's expected based on the model data and the National Hurricane Center, the heaviest winds are going to remain offshore. The water will rise. They will get some coastal flooding. I'm going to show you the maps here in a minute. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be a fraction of the devastation that has taken place down in the Bahamas. That I can guarantee you. They're not going to see anything close to what the Bahamas has been dealing with the past 2 days. So that's where our thoughts really need to be as far as this country is concerned. Send your money down to the Bahamas. They need all the help they can get. I'm going to show you some unbelievably dramatic footage that's going on for the Bahamas right now. And it just blows your mind, the devastation down there. This is not going to be devastation in the Carolinas. This is going to be a coastal flooding event. If you live inland, you don't even need shutters on the coast. This is not a shutter up hurricane. It's the highest winds are going to remain offshore for the most part. There will become some gusts possibly to hurricane force, but there's not going to be any sustained hurricane force winds on land. That I can guarantee you with this hurricane. All right, so let's go ahead and let me get out of this. And if you don't like what I just said, that's too bad. I'm just telling you the way to. Now, I'm not saying that people in the Carolinas should take this storm lightly. That's not my implications here. I'm just saying water is your enemy here. The water is going to rise. It's going to inundate these canals, waterways, low-lying areas. Yes, there's going to be some problems on the coast because this thing has a dome of water with it that it's built up over all these days, and it's going to move in on these areas. So coastal flooding is going to be the biggest problem with this hurricane in the Carolinas. It is not going to be the wind. So let's take a look at, let's get back on that radar again. Because I want to show you, and this happens all the time on these storms, and I like to call it the bat look. And let me show you what I'm talking about. Right in here. You see that? It looks like, it's kind of like a bat. It looks like a head with bat wings on it. And whenever I see that, you see this a lot in the northern Gulf of Mexico. And what that is that is dry air working into the circulation. And generally that states that the system is not strengthening and it's going to be a gradual weakening process because the dry air has infiltrated the system. Now, you might say, well, it's over the Gulf Stream. It's got all that warm water. But there's dry air working into the circulation. You can see it on the radar. The eye has been broken most of the day. The hurricane hunters have found a broken eye wall. Sometimes it's to the west, sometimes it's to the south, sometimes it's to the north, but the eye wall has not been solid, and that allows that dry air to infiltrate because if it's not surrounded by moisture, the dry air has a little trouble circulating in. But once you get these dry slots, the dry air can maintain and get embedded in that circulation, and that's why we've seen the eye kind of disappear on the satellite imagery. And it's kind of cloud filled and there's dry air mixing in. So this is not going to be an intense hurricane up in the Carolinas. I just don't see that happening. Okay, there's something else I wanted to show you. Let me see here. Okay, let's go to the National Hurricane Center. I want to show you the, oh, by the way, before I do that, let me show you my current observations here in Delray Beach. These are my tower cam weather observations, and there's the current wind speed on the upper right-hand corner. And there's the pressure all day. It's been around 1,003 millibars, and now this evening, starting around 6 p.m., it's risen about a millibar and a half. Now it's 2 millibars higher than it was at 6 p.m. So it's going up about 2 millibars an hour right now, rising. We've had 2.10 inches of rain over the last couple of days. Our highest wind gust has been 38.8. Now, I know it says 35 miles an hour on that graph right there in the upper right-hand corner, but I have two sets of instruments on the tower. One is lower than the other. The one that at the apex of the tower is showing a high wind gust of around 39 miles an hour today. So the other one that's a little lower was 35 miles an hour. And that's fairly consistent with all the readings I've been getting from anywhere from, West Palm Beach south. Like there's been very little tropical storm force winds. There's been some higher gusts up around Melbourne, some gusts to 60, but I just showed you the observations. Even now, it's really not blowing that hard there right now even. I mean, it's blowing hard, don't get me wrong, but it's not hurricane force, anything close to hurricane force. But it is blowing tropical storm, but not hurricane force winds. But there is a hurricane warning out, and again, that's precautionary because one of those bands could reach in and maybe give them some gusts to hurricane force. Okay, let me go to the National Hurricane Center website. I want to show you some of these graphics because they're very important. Okay, and then we're going to go over some of the models because I want to show you not only the track of Dorian, but I want to show you some of the models on the other systems out there as well. So this is, let's do the surge inundation and we're going to focus on that and the rainfall because that's going to give you a good indication of what's going to happen here over the next couple of days. So let's go ahead and zoom this in. Let me screen capture this. Okay, here's the National Hurricane Center surge flooding risk over the next 3 days. I showed this last night on the show as well. So here we go with Florida, and I'm going to zoom all the way in as far as we can go because I want to kind of give an idea. And again, here's our legend down at the bottom of the screen. Doesn't quite all the way fit, but there's no red areas that, well, we'll see what happens when we get up the coast. But everything right now looks like it's blue and orange for the most part. So this is Point Vedra. This is where the hurricane warning is. Actually, was that Point Vedra? Let me see. That was the hurricane warnings from Sebastian to Point Vedra Beach. So this is where the hurricane warning ends going north. But here's the surge legend of what's expected. Greater than 3 feet. So 3 to 6 feet generally in the yellow areas here. And these are immediate coastal areas and a few areas around the St. Johns River. Again, some of these areas along Jacksonville Beach, Neptune Beach. And then we get up into Fernandina Beach, which, by the way, incidentally, Fernandina Beach is number 3 on my list this year to be impacted by a named storm. So it looks like that's going to be knocked off the list. I've already knocked off Nassau and Grand Isle, Louisiana, which was affected by Barry. Nassau was impacted by Dorian. And Wilmington is number 4. So Wilmington would also be impacted by Dorian. So I may, by the end of this week, and we have that system near Bermuda, that could become a named storm and impact Bermuda. So literally by the end of this week, I could have all of my top 5 impacted this year, which would be truly outstanding. Last year, I think it was 4 out of 5 of my top 5 were impacted. And of course, Great Abaco was number 6 on my list. So it's been, my predictions the past few years have been nothing short of outstanding. And it's really unheralded, and I'm kind of aggravated over it, but it is what it is. Okay. And we get up into Georgia, again, 3 feet or greater in some of the low-lying areas. And then we're going to see the numbers go up here a little bit as we get into South Carolina, I would think. Let's see. Okay, let's see where we are here. Wait a minute, how did I get past South Carolina here? Let me see. No, there's Savannah right there. Okay. That's what I thought. I didn't think I was that far north. Okay, here's Savannah, Georgia. Again, some coastal flooding in here, 3 feet, maybe a little higher than 3 feet. Hilton Head Island, there's a little sprinkling of some orange in there. We can't zoom the map in any more than this, but Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, you see just a little sprinkling that could potentially be greater than 6 feet up in here. And again, this is based on if the eye wall comes in here. And again, the eye wall is supposed to be very close to the coast here, so it's remained to be seen if it comes on shore. But there are a few areas here on Port Royal Sound, greater than 6 feet up in here. A few areas right along the coast up to 6 feet. Here we go, Edisto. We're getting near Charleston here. Edisto River. Here we go. Now we're up in the Charleston area. And you notice how here in just southeast of Charleston, Folly Beach. This is the area that went underwater in Hurricane Hugo, by the way, back in 1989. Got devastated. This whole island right here, Folly Beach, just got destroyed by Hurricane Hugo. But greater than 6 foot storm surge expected up in here. So that could be pretty, that we'll have to watch for that area. That looks like it's very vulnerable, and that could be a newsmaker right there. The Foley Beach area looks like it's vulnerable to some surge flooding and tidal rises. And then over here, Sullivan's Island, that is an area also that got destroyed. Isle of Palms also got destroyed in Hugo in 1989. A lot of water piled in, and that could happen here again. Now we're getting up into the Georgetown area. There's McClellanville. That's very vulnerable to surge flooding. Look at the orange areas here that could flood greater than 6 feet. Notice how we're getting more oranges here as we get further north because there's supposed to be greater impacts from Hurricane Dorian as it gets up in this area because the eye wall may actually touch some of these areas. Even though, like I said, I don't, unless you get near the eye, I don't think you're going to get the hurricane force sustained winds. It's going to be mainly just tropical storm force winds with some gusts. But again, it's that dome of water that's been built up all these days that's going to be moving into these areas. So it's not going to be the wind, it's going to be the water that's going to be a problem up in here. Murrells Inlet, orange, 6 feet. Myrtle Beach, right along the coast, up to 6 feet inundation. Now we get North Myrtle Beach. It's a little less of a threat here. We're talking 3 feet, up to between 3 and 6 feet up in the Myrtle Beach area. Okay, now we're getting over towards Wilmington and southeastern North Carolina, Carolina Beach, 3 foot potential, 3 to 6 feet. Wrightsville Beach, 3 to 6 feet. Topsail Beach, which is very vulnerable to surge flooding, that's 3 to. I remember that area got slammed in Hurricane Fran in '96, absolutely devastated. Let's see, 3 foot. All these areas are all in the yellow, which is between 3 and 6 feet. Now we're getting up towards Morehead City area, Emerald Isle. That's also a surge-prone area, 3 to 6 feet. But notice over here, it's all light blue, so it's not real bad over here as you get toward the Outer Banks and Move up here. A few areas are 3-foot inundation, but the Outer Banks look like they're pretty good here. Ocracoke, 1 foot generally. Surge expected up in here. I think the thinking up here is going to be the winds are going to be mainly offshore. I think that, and that's why you see, look up here where Avon is on the west side. In the bay here, you're going to see all the flooding of the water piling up because the water is going to be coming like this, and it's going to be coming in this direction here, offshore. So the surge flooding is going to be inland instead of on the coast, more than likely up in the Outer Banks. All right, so that's generally my thinking on this. Is the water is going to be the big deal in the Carolinas on this, and if the core of this hurricane gets really, really close or right on the coast, this could be a huge surge event for South and North Carolina. There could be a lot of coastal flooding, and it'll be a bigger story than what it would be expected to be if the eye remains 30, 40 miles off the coast. It'll make a huge difference. But if that thing moves in, that water's all going to follow it. So it's going to be a huge flooding event. And this is why I hope everybody got off these coastal areas in South and North Carolina, especially those yellow areas that I pointed out on the map. I hope everybody got off those areas or away from those canals and waterways where they can get up the rising waters, especially at those high tides. By the way, let me pull that up. I wanted to look that up earlier and I forgot to do it. Let me write it down because I want to make sure I don't forget to do this. Tides. Because I don't want to leave the NHC page yet. I got more graphics to show you. By the way, here's the wind history of Hurricane. Let me capture it here. So here's the history of Hurricane Dorian so far. It hit Barbados as a tropical storm, St. Lucia, Martinique. It impacted St. Croix, St. John, and St. Thomas. Became a hurricane over St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. Then it went to the west, bent to the west. It brushed Eleuthera Island. It brushed Nassau. It hit Great Abaco. It hit Grand Bahama. And you see now that it's brushing the Florida coast, the central Florida coast. And it's remained to be seen what happens up here in the Carolinas and Georgia. But that's the wind history of Hurricane Dorian. Of course, the red are hurricane force wind fields. So it's kind of a tiny hurricane force wind field the entire time. But notice at the end of that swath, it's expanded a little bit. Again, let's look at these wind speed probabilities. And these are the tropical storm force wind probabilities. So again, it's almost assured that you're going to have tropical storm force winds in South Carolina and North Carolina, 90% plus based on this graphic right here. But when you zoom in, you can't zoom in on this map, but if it looks like it's 80% or 70% respectively when it gets to the Georgia coastline and northeast Florida. So it's not etched in stone that there's going to be tropical storm sustained winds, 1 minute average sustained winds of 39 miles an hour or greater on the Georgia coastline, but it's almost assured that that's going to happen in South Carolina. But then when you pull up the hurricane wind speed probabilities, gosh, I wish you could zoom in on these maps a little more. It's kind of crazy that you can't really make it out, but it looks like when you get up into Georgia, it looks like it's 40 to 50% chance, and then when you get up to the South Carolina, it's 50 to 60%. And again, it doesn't go out that far into the North Carolina because it hasn't gotten close enough yet. But the highest chances, obviously, from where it is right now is going to be in South Carolina. And what else did I want to show you? Okay, coastal flooding potential. So we're talking about a 20% moderate chance of flash flooding from very heavy rainfall, and that's going through September 6th, going through Friday. So there's no high potential, but there's a moderate potential for flash flooding, and that's because of any potential rain that would come down. Here's the rain graphic. Again, 6 to 10 inches along the coast of the Carolinas is what is expected. And I think the rain and the surge, still think the surge is going to be the biggest deal in the Carolinas right now. The rising of the water is my biggest concern, followed by the rain, then followed by the wind. I think the wind is going to be a non-factor. I think there might even be a bigger chance. Well, actually, even tornadic activity might be minimal because the right front quadrant is where you get a lot of tornado spin-ups as opposed to the left side, and they're going to be on the left side. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of tornado activity either as this passes by. Okay, so let me pull up the, let me go ahead and, oh, you know what? I could have just went from Hurricane City. There is a way to look up the tides at Hurricane City. Go to my predictions page using the drop-down menu. Go to Jim's predictions. Down at the bottom, it's, you look for, expected high tides. Actually, you know what? I have it on my maps. Let me pull my maps up. Why didn't I think of that? I have it on my tracking map. Let me go back to the tracking map. Okay, and tides. Yeah, here we go. See if it's working because I haven't used it in a long time. Yeah, here we go. So let's take a look at the tides in. I made these maps, by the way. Well, I didn't draw this map, but I added all the layers on here. So I added all the tides. Oh, let me capture. What am I doing here? Hold on a minute. Let me capture it for you. Okay, so when you click on the tracking, Hurricane City tracking, and the yellow boxes down at the bottom, one of the options is tides, and it'll pull its map up. You can zoom in on the Carolinas. So let's go to, let's just use Wilmington as an example. You click on the little pin there, and then you click on the graphic, and here we go. For September 3rd, 2019, we have a high tide. That's today. Let's see, high tide at, that was this morning, high tide. We have a low tide going into the early morning hours tomorrow. Then we have a high tide tomorrow afternoon, and they're expecting 5.37 foot tides. So that's going to be the high point is tomorrow afternoon. Well, no, actually, wait, tomorrow afternoon's Wednesday. It would be probably Thursday would be their biggest tidal days, but this only goes out for 36 hours. Let me see if it'll give me more than two. Yeah, let me try 3 days and see what happens. Oh, yeah, here we go. Okay, so you can go out in time. So here we go, 9/5. We're talking another high tide around late on in the evening of, on Thursday evening, there's another high tide at 4.35 feet. So I'm just extrapolating this out along the coast because generally the tides are pretty close to one another up in the certain areas. So generally, we're looking at high tides tomorrow. Let me see. Today it was 11:32. Yeah, around noontime was high tide today. Midnight high tide. Then we have, yeah, around noon tomorrow high tide. And then we have around midnight high tide on the 5th. So it's a midnight noon high tide pattern right now for the Carolinas. So we'll focus on those times of the day. Around midday and midnight is when the tides are going to be at high tide. So the nighttime ones will be the scariest because of the fact that it's dark and you can't really see the water rising as well, especially when there's power outages, if there's a lot of power outages. All right, so that's it for the tidal situation. Let me go ahead and show you a video from earlier today. Unbelievable footage. This was from 7 News here in Miami. So let's go ahead and, Yeah, let's go ahead and play this. And I am going to capture this.
Marsh Harbor. That's the mud.
Okay, let me rewind this because I want to show you some of the beginning of this. These houses right here, I wish I could zoom in on this, but I just want to show you something that's completely amazing to me. This house right here, like these houses on, and this is right, I'm assuming this is one of the out islands right near Marsh Harbor. And from what I understand, and I was listening to Brian Norcross earlier today on WPLG, and he's saying that these are extremely well-built homes. These are like, supposed to be Cat 5 rated homes. These are not flim-flammy homes. And they got absolutely annihilated, some of these homes. And again, that wind was screaming here from the east, straight in on these homes. And you can see, the roofs are peeled back. And I showed you some video yesterday. I showed you a video yesterday of the apartment complex where the railings of the stairs were blown off. That's just incredible. The actual railings for the balconies and the railings going up the stairs were completely ripped off the stairs. You couldn't even see the railing there anymore. It was completely gone. Absolutely unbelievable wind that was screaming through there. Let's go one more time and play this thing one more time.
Marsh Harbor, Marsh Harbor. That's the mud.
So every time I watch a video like that, all I can think of is what it must have been like for those people in those houses, like when the roof blows off and all the shrapnel from all over the neighborhood is flying into your house. Where do you go? I mean, when the roof is completely gone, I guess you're in your bathtub. I mean, I guess that's how they survived. I imagine there's got to be some horror stories about how people survived that hurricane when it came through there, because some of these buildings, the roofs are completely gone, and they don't have basements or anything like that. So, and then when the water was coming in, so the water's coming in, they can't go low because the water, they'll drown, and so they have to be above the water, and there's debris flying everywhere. Like, I just can't even imagine what was happening on those islands for that long of a period of time, 24 to 36 hours. It boggles the mind. It really does. And as I said on the show last night, if you're in South Florida, don't complain. I mean, yeah, you might have lost a couple of days of business. I've already heard the bitching going on. I got to go back to work. I have to make a living. I lost tourism dollars because of the holiday and blah blah blah. You could have, if that would have hit Broward County or Palm Beach County or even Dade County, it would be like a gigantic junkyard because there's so many buildings and so much infrastructure down here. You take that amount of wind and you put it in a city like that, the carnage would be, you wouldn't be going back to work next week. You wouldn't be going back to work next month. You might not even be going back to work in the same building that you were working in for 6 months. It would completely change the face of South Florida. So because you didn't have to do all those things, you didn't have to fix your house, you didn't lose much, you lost a couple days work, but you didn't have to fix your house and replace your car. And so how many cars were flipped over in those videos? My God. How many lost their windows and had their doors smashed in and their hoods blown open? And so the money that you saved, even if it's a fraction of what you would have spent to fix your house, you should send it to the people of the Bahamas. So I put a link up to on my Twitter page and on my Facebook page of donation centers. My two recommendations. Well, it's first of all there's a link, the WPLG link, and you can go to any of your local television stations. I don't care if you're in the Carolinas, if you're in North Florida. I'm sure everybody's starting up charities for the people of the Bahamas. But Food for the Poor is a organization that's been doing this for a long time. I know the people. They ship the containers. Well, I don't know them personally, but I've talked to them, and we've had a relationship for a lot of years. What they do is they collect all the donations, the clothing, the food, the water, the batteries, whatever people need, and they put it in the shipping containers and they get it to the island. They're experts at this, and they know how to do it. They did it for the Haiti earthquake and all the hurricanes that have hit down in the Caribbean. So they're already masters at working the inner workings to get the supplies there as quick as possible. So Food for the Poor, and go to your local television station website, and I'm sure they're everywhere. All the normal donation centers that are trustworthy. But you really want to get to these organizations that have the inner workings of how to get stuff in there quicker. Some of these big organizations, man, they're money grabbers and they're disorganized. It's more of a bureaucracy, right? But when you get some of the organizations like Food for the Poor, and Food for the Poor is a pretty big organization, but they're masters at disasters, right? So that's where you want your money to go. So that's my advice on that. So, okay, we talked about the tides. We talked about, the models. What am I doing? I forgot to show you the models. So we have this. Let's focus on Dorian, and then we have these other systems out there, and there's one system coming off Africa that may be a concern going down the road. I want to show you why. So here it is. Okay, so let me go to, let's go to Levi Cowan's site, the tropicaltidbits.com. Excellent job by Levi Cowan keeping the site up and going through all the high traffic and everything. Just an outstanding job. So let's go to the close-up models first of all, and then we'll pan out and look at the Euro and what the other systems are supposed to do. So here's Dorian, and this is the HWRF, which has not been a good model, by the way. Oh, let me capture it. Almost forgot to do that. Okay, so this model is the HWRF. It has not done well on Hurricane Dorian. Just letting you know. So let's run it, and it keeps it well off Cape Hatteras, which we're already, I mean Cape Canaveral rather, which we already know is happening at this hour. Now here's where it gets interesting. If this track were to pan out, let's just say the H-Wharf is right, which it's been terrible, but let's just say it hits it on this. You see that eye wall right there? That would bring hurricane force winds on shore. Not only that, but it would bring that storm surge on shore pretty good as well. So it has the center straddling the coast near Charleston and kind of half on and half off the coast. So if that H-Wharf pans out, this is going to be a big deal. This is going to be a surge event for South and North Carolina. It's going to be a huge surge event if that H-Wharf pans out. And then it has it going right over Wilmington, 966 millibars, which I don't think that's going to happen because it's already at 960. I think it's going to go higher than that. So it's kind of keeping it as a strong cat 2. I don't know that that's going to, I'm still thinking it's going to be a strong cat 1 when it gets up here. And then over the Outer Banks and then up towards the Canadian Maritimes. And again, this track would be rather interesting because I do have, it takes it into northeastern Nova Scotia, and I do have Sydney, Nova Scotia at number 12 on my list this year as well. So, and then it takes it into St. Pierre, Newfoundland, which is number 20 on my list this year, and then up into the North Atlantics. So that's one model. Let's run the HMON, which has also done horrible. The tropical models haven't had a good time with Dorian. Let me just put it to you that way. So here it goes. It goes up. Let me get this up. Okay, so it goes up. Kind of similar to the H-Wharf. Straddles the coast, right on the coast of Charleston, 965 millibars onshore through Wilmington, 975 millibars. Now we're getting near Cat 1 status, and then through the Outer Banks, up northeast, not into the northeast U.S., but toward Nova Scotia, skims just south of Nova Scotia, and heads into Newfoundland. So both of the tropical models, the HMON and the HWRF, are taking this right on the coast. And if those two models pan out, this will be a major flooding event for the coastal areas of the Carolinas. So let's run the GFS. And important to note, both of those models, by the way, did keep it off North Florida and Georgia. So here we go. This one takes it, the GFS takes it very close to the coast as well, right near, let me go back. That was, yeah, just offshore. And again, the GFS has also, it's better than the H-Wharf and the HMON, but it hasn't had a really good track record with Dorian. As I said before, it's not one of the best performing models on Dorian, the GFS. It's been okay, but not great. And this takes it very similar to the HMON and the HWRF, straddling the coast of North Carolina, and then over the eastern Outer Banks, northeast, just south of Nova Scotia, and just northeast. No, it does take it over Newfoundland. And then finally, let's run the Canadian, which has done terribly on Hurricane Dorian. And here we go. Offshore Georgia, offshore, a little bit further offshore than the GFS, and the HMON and the H-Wharf is the Canadian. And then over Wilmington, or just offshore Wilmington, just offshore the Outer Banks. So the Canadian is the rightmost outlier on this group of models, and then it has it going into northeast Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. Unfortunately, there's no zoomed in version of the Euro, so let's get to the 850 millibar chart here and run the Euro. Okay, so here we go with the Euro. Euro takes it a little bit south of the GFS, like just a tad south of where the GFS. So the Euro is pretty close to the coast as well. And that's why, like I said, even though it's going to be close, keep in mind most of those hurricane force winds are going to be on the right front quadrant, which may or may not make it on shore. Unless you get the eye touching that coast, because remember I showed you the recon, and those hurricane force winds that are sustained are right up against the eye. They're right up against the eye. If you go 10, 15 miles out, you're not getting sustained hurricane force winds, and the buoys are proving that right now to the north of the center. So unless you get that eye wall that's right next to the eye, you're not going to get the sustained hurricane force winds. But it's going to get close enough to where that dome of water is going to move in, and I think the Hurricane Center prognostications are right, 3 to 6 feet. So if this Euro pans out, 960 millibars, I think it's going to be weaker than that. Again, I think all these models are a little over aggressive in the intensity. It takes it right just off the coast of Wilmington, just off the coast of the Outer Banks, and then up just right near Nova Scotia is the European model, which has been the best of all these models. So the fact that the European is taking it this close to the coast is really a concern, and the people in the Carolinas, again, it's just going to be a water event. Primarily the winds aren't going to be a big deal. You don't need a shutter or anything like that, but the water is going to be a big deal if these tracks pan out. All right, so let's pan it out. Let's go and look at the entire North Atlantic, and let's put everything in motion here. So here we go. It's moving away from the Bahamas, and notice that Fernand moves into Mexico. The system that's out in the East Atlantic right now, that's going to be named Gabrielle, is going to move northwest into the open Atlantic. And then here comes, watch this 10, 15 millibar low between Africa and the Lesser Antilles. It moves off to the west, tries to develop. Well, the European has another one developing behind that. Okay, so the Euro isn't showing, again, the Euro is only going out 5 days though. So let's go and show you the GFS. And let's rewind it a little bit. So here comes Dorian straddling the coast. Fernand moves into Mexico. Gabrielle moves into the North Atlantic. Now here comes that low. Watch it down at the bottom of the screen there, coming across from Africa on the Intertropical Convergence Zone, 10:08, 10:09. This is going out to Wednesday, September 11th. Now we have a hurricane developing east of the Leeward Islands, and in this run it goes very near the Virgin Islands, maybe St. Martin, Virgin Islands, north of Puerto Rico, heads towards the eastern Bahamas. And then we have a hurricane of strengthening intensity, Category 3 type pressures right near the northwest Bahamas. Again, could you imagine if that happens? Like those people in the Bahamas. But again, this is going out to the 17th. This is like almost a 2-week model, which are garbage, by the way. But this is just some guidance, showing a hurricane approaching the southeastern United States, heading toward the Carolinas. So this might not be the last, Dorian might not be the last impacts we're seeing for these same areas that were impacted by Dorian, might be impacted by, the next name on the list would be, was it Gabrielle? Umberto would be that name of that hurricane, Umberto, if that were to pan out. Let's look at the legacy, the GFS legacy, which used to be used the past several years, was replaced by the new GFS. So that one here, let's go into motion, and you see the legacy showing it's straddling the coast of South and North Carolina. Gabrielle moves into the North Atlantic, and here comes that low pressure heading towards the Leeward Islands. And we're going out to the 11th. And some kind of tropical system, whether it's a tropical storm, goes through the northern Leeward Islands and then towards Puerto Rico. And that's going out to Friday the 13th. And the model doesn't go out any further because it's still loading. Let's look at the Canadian. And put this in motion. So here we are current right here. So the Canadian, again, is the furthest east of all the models, by the way, for the southeastern United States. Gabrielle moves into the North Atlantic. Here comes that low pressure, and it takes it north. The Canadian wants to take that system that the GFS says is going to make it all the way across and be a threat. The Canadian wants to take it into the North Atlantic. Let's run the NavGem. So let's go to our current position. Okay, and the NavGem has it straddling the coast, very close to South Carolina and North Carolina. Gabrielle goes into the North Atlantic. And it shows a low pressure here on the 9th, September 9th, in the mid-Atlantic heading towards the Leeward Islands. I hate to run this icon model because doesn't do much for me. But let's run it anyway. Because the icon for days and days and days and days had this coming into South Florida, which never happened. Terrible model. It's pretty decent on intensity, but not on track at all. Has it riding off the Carolinas. So just about every model has this straddling the coast. So it's going to be some good surge impacts coming in on the Carolinas for sure. And it has this going up towards Nova Scotia, northern Nova Scotia. Gabrielle in the North Atlantic. Here comes the low behind it. There's a weak low heading toward the leewards and another one behind it. So that's it. Just wanted to let you know there is the threat for another system coming off Africa and coming across. But again, those two-week models are garbage. They're terrible. It's just general guidance. Only the GFS is showing this. GFS is good at showing long-range development, but long-range track, that's a whole other story. It's just general guidance. Don't let it scare you if you live in the Bahamas. You're probably not watching this anyway if you live in Grand Bahama or Great Abaco. I know you don't have any electricity. So just don't spread any rumors like that. Let that model play out a little bit because it's so far out. Like the chances of that happening are slim at this point. But it's just something to keep on your radar. Watch it tomorrow, watch it the next day, see if it develops and if the models start grabbing onto it and if it's going to make it all the way across. But right now, our thoughts are going to be with Carolinas tomorrow. The impact time, I'm going to send an email to my list in the morning with the potential threat for the Carolinas with the center, the wind field, showing this wind field of the hurricane force wind field and how close it's going to get to the coastline and what the surge is going to be. That'll all be sent in tomorrow's email for the Carolinas. And then if it looks like the core of this thing is going to come on shore, we'll do a hurricane warning show on this because it'll become part of the archive at that point. But if it's the glancing blow show and most of the worst conditions remain out over the water, I may not do any coverage on it. It just depends on how close it's going to get to the Carolina coast of South and North Carolina. I'll make that call tomorrow probably as to whether we go into any kind of extended coverage on Dorian. But right now the thoughts are right now with the Bahamas and the recovery effort. So if you can donate, please do that for the people of the Bahamas. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm going to call it. I'm just not haven't been feeling good the last few days. I'm going to get to bed here. I'll be sending an email in the morning, and then I'll be live again tomorrow night. We'll talk about it one way. Even whether I cover it or not, I'm still going to be live tomorrow night because it's a big night, and it's going to be a big night, a big event coming up here for the Carolinas, especially if it comes plowing in there. We'll definitely do a hurricane warning show. All right, that's it. Thank you for watching. Spread the word. Please donate if you can, or at the very least donate to the people in the Bahamas. I'm Jim Williams. Good night, everybody.